All right, so we will do the code of ethics first, and then the safety concerns, and then when you should refer and when you should seek supervision, and then go over 10 practice questions. So the absolute most important thing is that we always want to promote the well-being of our clients, meaning whatever they want to do, they have the right to say what they want. So that's often a buzzword called self-determination. So anything that they determine for themselves that they want, we have to grant it. However, we have an obligation to the larger society saying if someone's trying to hurt someone else, hurt themselves, or abuse someone or neglect someone, that supersedes what they want, and they automatically lose their right to self-determination. Because if someone's trying to harm someone, they're not in the right mind, so they are not required. We're not required to respect that. So if someone's trying to hurt someone, we need to get someone involved or their appropriate authorities and everything like that. If it's a child, CPS. If it's adults, police potentially. But knowing that the client gets to determine what they want until they step in front of what would be deemed societally appropriate, which then leads into the biggest buzzword that gets people tripped up all the time, which is self-determination. We always say we need to give the person right to self-determination. They have this, and they can do all of these things. But at the end of the day, what does self-determination mean? It means that they get to determine what they would like to see for themselves in their situation. But that's not always the first consideration. Why? Because again, safety supersedes everything. So if you see an exam question say, respect the right to self-determination, did we already gauge safety? Did we already gauge that they have all of the information that they need to be able to determine and make that decision for themselves? And if not, there are steps that we have to take prior to that. But again, we have the right to limit it if, in our professional judgment, key emphasis on professional, not our own personal values, feels that this person's at risk to harm someone or in danger to themselves or abuse and neglecting someone, we can supersede that and say, actually, that's not a good option for you. But at the end of the day, it's up to them to decide what they want if they don't propose or pose that serious or foreseeable risk of danger to themselves or someone else. So it's very, very tricky because people are always saying they need to have that right to self-determination, but there are layers that come before that. We can't automatically just be like, yep, you're the person that can determine everything for yourself. We need to make sure they're informed and that there's no danger to themselves, others, or even the community. And that comes with the informed consent, because if they are able to make an informed consent decision, they probably aren't a risk to anyone else. They've been provided the needed information and they're able to make that a determination for themselves. So within this, we always need to make sure there's a valid informed consent. And again, I kind of alluded to it, but we have to inform them. We have to make sure they're safe and make sure it's the service that they want. So we need to use clear and understandable language for them to make sure that they're able to understand. Because if they are not able to understand, then they're not actually informed on what is capable for them. So if they don't understand, so say their second language is English and we're using English and they don't understand and they're just agreeing, we need to make sure that we get them, one, an interpreter if it's needed, or two, make sure that they understand and we're going at their pace, not a pace that we feel that they should be able to go at. So with this, it can limit the amount of services that they're able to have. And we always need to make sure that the client can ask questions, because again, we don't want to get on that trip of I determine what's right for the client. They can ask questions and challenge what we think. Just because we made a statement doesn't make it 100% valid. So we need to make sure that they're informed on their situation and they understand. And that's kind of a detail that we tend to overlook is they must understand me because they're agreeing with me. But that's not always the case. So if a question is saying inform the client of the decision, that's probably the choice that you should go with, because it's always best to start where the client is and then branch out from there. But if we don't start where they're at and we think they should start somewhere else, we're not doing a justice to the client. So when a client is not literate and has difficulty understanding, we need to take the necessary steps for them to comprehend it. Whether we read it to them, whether we use different vernacular, or anything along those lines, we need to make sure that they're in a possible situation to understand it, because the comprehension is the biggest thing when it comes to informed consent. Because if someone is not informed about their decisions and things along those lines, how are they going to be able to tell us what they want? It'd be like if you walked into the exam, but they didn't tell you the location and the time. You're like, okay, I know I'm supposed to have take my exam sometime, but I'm not sure what day. So I guess I just sit outside this building this entire time. And then when it's my shot, I'll take it. No, you have to make sure that you get the right information to them and they understand it. And when possible, get them an interpreter. We always offer it, but again, they have the right to self-determination. So I've had a client who he spoke Russian. Phil does not know Russian, but I offered to him every single time, do you want a Russian interpreter? He said, no, I understand English well enough. But again, when he didn't understand me, I would use Google Translate because that's what he wanted. It didn't pose danger to him because he knew English well enough for him. I wasn't going to say, all right, we're getting an interpreter in here because I feel uncomfortable with doing this. No, it's up to them to decide what they want, as long as there's no safety concerns to themselves, others, and there's obviously no abuse and neglect there, but I'll still reiterate that just to make sure that it's still on our mind. And we always need to protect the client's interests by seeking permission from appropriate third parties, or we need to make sure that the client is understanding when they don't get the right information. But again, we should always ensure that third parties act in a manner that's consistent with the client's wishes and interests. Just because someone has maybe a guardian or maybe someone speaking for them, power of attorney, etc., we still have to understand what the client wants, as long as they're oriented to be able to do so. Because if the third party's not doing that, we can kick back and ensure that we give them the right to have that informed consent. But again, there's layers to this. But if the client is saying something different than the third party person and it's not going to hurt the client, we need to go kind of what the client is saying and get that third party person on the same page as them. But again, we need to make sure that client is informed and they're able to make the right decisions for them. And that is their lens, not the decisions we think are right for them. So when the clients are receiving services involuntary, we need to provide information about the nature and extent to the client to refuse that service. So again, a client has every single right to refuse a service. Let's say they're coming in for probation and they say, I'm not coming to see you. We would just inform them and say, hey, this could possibly be detrimental to your situation. But at the end of the day, you have the right to determine what happens for your services, but here are the negative impacts that could possibly happen for you not engaging in these services. Again, when they're informed, they can provide an informed decision, aka their informed consent. We need to discuss the client's policies regarding the use of technology. Technology is everywhere now, but as a social worker, we may neglect it and say, I'm not entirely sure whether this person understands what we'd be utilizing it for. And it's always for professional services. Again, I don't think that I have to note that, but I always point it out because a lot of times dual relationships and conflict of interest can arise, and it's a normal thing. But knowing how to address and assess them will lower the chances of you having an ethical dilemma around it. But again, if you were unsure of how we were going to utilize technology and I started using my cell phone around you, you may think that I'm ignoring you, but it's just how I have to document and get your services. And maybe I'm scheduling you rides and stuff like that. So with information comes clarification, and with clarification comes comfort and competency. So we need to make sure the person is able to understand what is going on with and for their services 100% of the time. And if they don't, creating that environment for them to ask questions. So when the social worker is going to utilize it, we need to obtain that informed consent. So if a client does not want us to do it, that is their right to say that they don't want to. So we need to gauge their competency or capacity to give that informed consent around it. So for example, if a client is paranoid or having a psychotic episode and I'm using technology around them and that's a huge trigger for them, I'm probably not going to use technology around them because it's going to trigger an episode, or it could potentially put myself or them at danger in some way. So I'd find an alternative way to do so. But I need to make sure that they're able to consent and have that right to decline it. So the use of technology should always be suitable and available to them. But again, we're not going to put the client in a situation where it's not a part of something that they could possibly do due to intellectual, emotional, or physical ability. So for example, if I schedule appointments with people via telephone and I know a client doesn't have the financial means to have a telephone, I'm not going to schedule appointments via the telephone with that person. I'll find an alternative way because I want to lower the risk and limitations for them to not get the service because I want people to benefit from everything. And I need to identify an alternative model of delivering that service to them. So with that, I'm not going to put a client in a situation that they may not be able to benefit from or even sustain. Because a lot of times our view of what a client is capable or able to do may not be the actual reality. So we have to start again where the client is and not where we think they should be. And again, having that conversation with them to understand what is going on with and for them. And we always need to obtain informed consent before doing audio or video recordings. And that kind of goes without saying. But again, we always have these provisions in here because there were times where people didn't ask and they just did what they thought was best for the client and the client didn't like it. So if you're going to do anything with and for the client's treatment, make sure that you have their informed consent, because if they're able to provide that consent in writing, not verbal, because writing is the solidified, verbal, there's no tracking of it. And we always need to obtain the client's consent before conducting an electronic search of them for professional reasons. Again, you're not going to search somebody online based on the sole fact that you're curious about their life and what you want to figure out from them. Because again, we can only go based on what the client is telling us. And if we know that a client has a particular charge or particular past and it's not regarding their treatment, we're not going to search them up. That's just us trying to appease our own interest rather than the interest of the client. You need to start where the client is, know what am I supposed to do professionally and what am I able to do professionally. And if it's for safety concerns, sure, you can look it up, because again, clients' rights are superseded by the safety of them, safety of other people, or abuse and neglect of themselves or others. Competence is a huge one. We need to provide services that represent only the services and things that we're competent in doing. So if we don't have the training or education or licensure or anything like that, we can't just say, yep, I'm going to do this based on who I am because I'm able and capable of doing this. So if I wasn't a clinically licensed social worker, I'm not going to start my own agency and start trying to bill insurances because that's not what I'm able to do. And if I did not have the experience of passing the exam and navigating and creating questions and helping people pass the exam, you guys probably wouldn't want to hear me. You would say, who is this guy and why is he trying to say that he's helping people pass the exam? But since I have that credibility and that competence of getting people navigated and directed in the appropriate paths to pass the exam, you guys tend to listen to me a lot more than people that say, I haven't helped anyone pass, but I know everything and have high passing rates. I never claim I have high passing rates because it's your guys' efforts and not mine that get you guys to where you want to go. But again, if I didn't have the experience of passing the exam, you guys probably wouldn't listen to me and I wouldn't advertise that I have it. So always practice in your scope and what you're competent in. And if you don't, get supervision around the issue or efforts or anything like that. And those that know me, I have a substance use credential because I practice heavily in substance use and do lectures very, very often around it. But if I didn't have the experience and the exposure and the research and all the stuff around it, I wouldn't be able to claim that I know things about substance use. So stay within your lane and do what you need to do. So on exam questions, you're going to see you don't have any experience around this. If you have no experience, you're going to refer them out. If you have a little bit of experience, you're going to seek supervision to supplement that up. And that's related to our competence. If you're not competent in an area, make sure you get the needed support around it. So we can only provide things around what we are competent in. And if not, get supervision from people who are competent around the intervention or techniques or anything along those lines. We generally recognize standards that don't exist in emergent areas, but we always need to protect the clients from harm because there's always new emerging and cutting edge things coming out every single day. So back in the golden ages, I guess, dark ages, CBT was a new thing. Now CBT is everywhere. So when CBT first came out, people weren't quote unquote experts, but we did not want to put our clients in an issue or places of a harm because we didn't want to benefit ourselves in some way. Our clients are not our experimentation things. If the standards do not exist, reach out to people that create it because they possibly have standards and they're adapting them every single day to find the best possible benefit for them in some way, shape, or form. And when we're using technology, we need to ensure that we're competent in it as well as the clients are able to have that as well, because we need to understand that technology is an emergent thing. And if we're not competent in it, we need to educate ourselves around what is needed and what am I missing to get this done. Because the understanding of all these technological things could be a barrier to you providing services to a client in some way, shape, or form. So we need to always be competent in what we're doing, because if we're incompetent, then we're not going to be able to help our clients in the best way possible. And when we're using technology, we always need to make sure that we're within the jurisdiction of what we're doing. Your state supersedes everything, but the national board has the same standards and we're all upheld to the code of ethics, but your state may have some different plays on what is capable and what is possible for this. So that's always important to know what you're doing and where you're located, what are the regulations and what are the things that are different from the national. So that way you are ethically practicing and not just going based off. So if you move from, let's say, I live in Michigan, but let's say I wanted to move to California, I would then need to look up what is California's requirements and what are the regulations for social workers out there. I can't just assume everyone has the same rules and regulations. Again, on the exam, you never want to assume, you want to understand and dissect it in the best way possible. And then cultural awareness and social diversity is one of the trickiest ones because it's the most vague, because it's impossible to be what we say culturally competent in every single person. But based on the cultures that you see, you should have some knowledge in what you are seeing. But again, we never assume. We always want to start where the client is and allow for them to tell us what their values and what their morals and what their cultural impacts are on their services. We need to have a base of knowledge around what they're bringing into us, and we need to be sensitive to particular cultures. We're not going to probe our clients and say, tell me everything about your culture, because they may not even represent that culture. But we'd always want to start where our client is and then develop an understanding from there. Because yes, we all have different cultures and different values, but we don't always follow what our overarching culture tells us to do, because we're all independent people and need to have that. But when we don't have it, we need to obtain education and seek guidance around the different identifiers such as race, ethnicity, sex, gender identity, age, marital status, political beliefs. But again, we always start with where the client is and we don't assume anything, and we do not put our own morals, values, beliefs onto the client. Once we walk into that therapeutic setting, our identity ends and we are a social worker to help mobilize and stabilize them. Our morals, values, and things are for our at-home life, not our professional life. And that's the sticky part of when people start discriminating based on these social identifiers, because we have preconceived notions and bias within us, but we do not let it impact our practices, because that is how we will start harming our clients in some way, shape, or form. And we need to provide social work services, but we need to be aware of the socioeconomic statuses and the cultural differences amongst this. So I kind of alluded to this before, but we're not going to put somebody in a negative spot based on the fact that we want them to do some intervention, or if a culture does not want to utilize technological advancements or anything like that, it's their right. And we need to find an alternative way to do that. And we need to be aware of any issues that could impact the service delivery. And we need to adapt to accommodate that different culture, because it's our duty to serve. And if something is a barrier for them, we have to knock that wall down, construct it to look how they want it to look, and then get them where they want to go. And then conflicts of interest is one of the big heavy hitters. And people always say, what's the difference between a conflict of interest and a dual relationship? I'm about to get in with that. Sit back and we will go with it. So we should be alert and avoid any conflicts of interest that interfere and make our judgment anything than impartial. So with this, if I know somebody outside of the agency and they could benefit me in some way, I'm not going to seek services with them, or I'm going to refer them out, because we need to inform clients of when these things can arise, and we need to keep the client's rights on the forefront. The client's purpose for being in our office supersedes any benefits that we could get from them in any way, shape, or form. And it's up to us to keep that judgment on their side. And it may require us to terminate them out of services based on the sole fact that we don't want overlapping boundaries, and we don't want somebody that we know outside of the agency at our kitchen table. So if you know somebody, or you could potentially get impacted based on who they are, and your judgment goes outside the window and you stop being clinically objective and you start being clinically subjective, subject to being in violation of the ethics, then you're in trouble. So we'd always refer people out or even terminate them if it's going to impact our ability to protect the client's identity and to help them in some way, shape, or form. And we should never take unfair advantage of them in any way, whether it's political, personal, business, or anything along those lines. Never take advantage of your clients. They're there to get help from you, not for you helping yourself to them. We're not benefiting from our clients at all, because they're here to get helped, not you help yourselves to them. So keep that in mind. And we should not engage in dual or multiple relationships, meaning if I know somebody outside of the agency and it's just the sole fact that I know who they are, or they are a friend of the family, that's sticky as well. Because if you don't have that firm boundary, and let's say you guys are at a social event together and you don't nip it in the bud, they're going to want therapy services outside the agency, and you can't keep that confidentiality away from it. And we need to make sure, even former clients, that we're not at any risk of exploiting them or harming them in some way based on, let's say a client wants to talk to you outside the agency, you engage in it, and then you figure out you're being unethical, but you keep doing it anyway. And then they call you off the clock saying that they want to kill themselves. That's a very, very sticky spot. So we need to keep in mind, keep those firm boundaries. Everything is professional and you stay within your lane. And if they're unavoidable, it's up to us to set those clear boundaries. So oftentimes social workers in rural areas find it very, very difficult to stay away from their clients because it's rural and you may be the only social worker in town. So if it's unavoidable, you need to make that clear, culturally appropriate boundary with a client in some way. And if you are having dual or mutual relationships, make sure that it cannot be viewed that you're exploiting the client in some way or benefiting from them. You just happen to be occupying the same space. And when we provide services to two or more people who are in a relationship, social workers should clarify to all parties what our obligations are, and it's to both of them. But we're not going to put ourselves in a conflict of interest. Let's say they have a custody case and they want us to say, which parent do you think is the most suitable? We need to avoid that at all costs, because we need to clarify what our role is, and that's not to put ourselves in a sticky situation. So we'd always be clear and set that boundary and say, yes, I'm willing to work with both of you, but I'm not going to pit each other against you. And I need to keep my professional judgment about me, and I need to be on that page. And we should avoid communication using technology for non-work related or personal reasons. You're not going to hit your client up on Facebook and say, what's up, dude? No, you're not going to schedule appointments via the computer or anything like that. You're not going to accept any friend requests from them, or you're not going to pursue them outside of that professional role. Again, we're not going to search our people online just because we're curious to see what they're doing. We need to keep that communication for professional reasons only. And we need to be aware that posting personal information is not harming a client, or it's not causing boundary confusion. Like, I'm not accepting a friend request from a client on Facebook and commenting on their picture, that looks really cool. They're like, well, who's this person and why are they inquiring about my personal life? Or why are they going that extra mile of doing these things when it's not benefiting them clinically, but more on a personal level. We need to be aware of any personal affiliations that may increase the likelihood that we're discovered on the internet. So, me being the person that I am, you Google who I am, I'm going to be searchable. You're going to be able to see me on YouTube. You're going to see my Facebook page. You're going to see all of it. But I'm not relaying any identifying client information, or I'm not degrading any clients, or I'm not processing about clients or anything on the internet. Mine's all positive vibes and helping social workers pass their exam. So you need to be aware of what the likelihood of you being found is, and what is the message that you're relaying to people in some way. Are you degrading people? Are you being negative? Or are your views going to impact your clinical awareness and what the clients think of you? But again, you have the right to have a life outside of it, but we need to make sure that we're not degrading any social identifying specifiers for clients, and making sure that we're not pushing clients away based on the sole fact of what our views and values and morals are, or if we're processing about clients on the internet or degrading them in any way. We have to be positive, professional, and propelling people in some way. If it's not productive towards your professional identity, it's probably not something that you should be sharing with other people on the internet. All right, so we also want to avoid accepting any social media requests from any clients in any way, shape, or form, because this can cause a boundary issue. It could perpetuate a dual relationship, or it could potentially harm clients. Why is this dangerous? Because in some people's world, social media is the end all be all. And if you're friends with them, they may think that you are their personal friend on the real. So declining any friend request. And if people do request you, being open and honest and saying, I'm not declining this because I don't think that we can not therapeutically work together, but I'm declining it based on my code of ethics says that I do not want to give you the wrong message, and I don't want to potentially harm you in any way, shape, or form. But again, some clients aren't going to take it that way, but your professional license is more important than one client's opinion of you. Now, privacy and confidentiality, we should always respect it unless we have a compelling professional reason not to do it. Again, harm to self, harm to others, or anything along those lines. But again, always protect the client's right to self-determination only in those particular situations. And if they give us a release, we share the information they're telling us to do it. Just because you have a release doesn't mean you can be a canary and tell every piece of information. Only the information that could be helpful for the client's services, or that they put their little initials next to because they've given us that consent. And we need to have that consent form in writing. If not, you're not just going to be sharing information. Sometimes you may have clients, or in the exam, it'll say that you don't have written consent from all parties or every client. Bad moves, bad vibes, don't share it. It's easier to go that extra mile and assert privilege if it's a subpoena, or just simply say, I can't confirm or deny if that person is being serviced here. We need to protect the confidentiality of all of the things and make sure that there's no danger to the clients. And if there is foreseeable danger, advocating on behalf of the client that the information isn't shared. But again, abuse, neglect, self to harm, self to others would be where we would need to disclose it. And any disclosure, least amount of information again. And when we are going to disclose, we need to inform the clients that the disclosure is being made. We're not just going to blindside the client and say, oh yeah, I didn't know. No, you need to inform them, hey, I'm going to disclose this information out of your records to be able to do this. But if it's going to harm the clients to know the information you're disclosing, then you would again document and say, I'm not doing this based on the fact of this. Social workers should disclose when interested parties would limit the disclosure or the right to confidentiality. So within this, we need to say when other people are inquiring on it, or if we have to say, if there's any abuse and neglect, I'll have to tell. And if you're trying to harm someone else or harm yourself, because we have that legal binding requirement to do so. And if there is, we need to provide any information to them to make sure that the social worker and client relationship is strengthened and assumed within that. So we need to be on the up and up and be transparent with clients to continue to have that rapport to be built and to make sure that what we're doing is leading them to a better spot. And when we provide counseling services to multiple people, we need to have everyone agree to remain confidential. But as you know, with people, we can never guarantee that other people aren't going to do the things that they would like to do. So when you're working with couples, it's best to say anything that is disclosed in services is likely to be known in an individual session and vice versa. But if something is disclosed in an individual session, you would prompt the person to share in that dual session. But if not, you're not going to tell the other person. You'd need to always prompt the person to tell them. And we need to inform clients involved in all of these things what we would need to disclose as well. Again, abuse, neglect, self-to-harm, self-to others. And we should not disclose any confidential information to third parties without authorized disclosure. Just because someone's paying for services does not mean we tell everyone the information that is being shared. Oftentimes, clients are okay with you getting like sign releases for their insurance or people that they want involved, but if they do not, you cannot engage in that just because they're paying for the services or the person's spouse or in a relationship without written consent. We're not going to consent. And we should not discuss confidential information in any setting that is not private unless the client supersedes that. So if the client is okay with meeting in a public place, that is okay. But if not, and you're just sharing it in the restaurant, if you are in a restaurant and let's say somebody in the restaurant knows the person you're talking about, you've breached confidentiality and broken HIPAA. And if it's about substance use, 42 CFR Part 2. So you need to be aware of what you're doing and making sure that if you're disclosing things, it's not within a public place, because then it raises the risk of you breaching confidentiality. And we need to protect the confidentiality of clients regarding legal, which begs the question of the subpoena and court order. So if it's a subpoena, we can assert privilege unless the client wants us to provide the information. But in a court order, we can't really ignore that. So we review our agency policy and then disclose the least amount of information, but we can advocate based on that. And if it is going to be causing harm to them, that is where we need to advocate and be on their best part. And again, limit and provide the least amount of information and make it unavailable to the public if it's going to demean or degrade someone in the same way. Social workers should protect the confidentiality when responding to requests to the media. Oftentimes, your agency is going to respond to them anyway. But if someone from the media encounters you, don't talk about your clients to them. Why? Breaching confidentiality, no written consent. And a media or reporter is not the person you need to talk to if there's a risk to self-harm or risk to others. You need to make sure what you're doing aligns with what you need to do. And make sure any written or electronic records aren't shared in any ways that could breach it. We need to make the secure efforts to make sure that if we're sending emails, we're putting it in the secure and encrypted, or if we're in an agency, we're locking up the files at night and we're not just leaving willy-nilly stuff in areas where people could see all of the information. We need to take reasonable steps to protect the communication to them. So if we are talking on the phone, it's in a private place, not a public place, because again, people have ears and they can hear information about people. And we need to make sure, again, we're using the encryption, passwords, firewalls, etc., to protect the clients. And when we're doing online posts and stuff, you're not going to be sharing about your clients online. But if you are doing mobile communication, it's encrypted or in code. So you can use initials, you can use like file numbers, etc. We should develop a disclosure thing to notify the client if we have breached it. So we tell the client, hey, I kind of breached the confidentiality, and this is the needed steps, and this is what I'm going to do with it. So if you make a mistake, own up to it and get it done. And when we have unauthorized access, we need to inform the client and then inform any of the legal standards of what is going on. Because if someone's hacked into your files or anything, you need to make sure you're still protecting it and cut it off as much as you possibly can. But we always inform the client what is going on within their services so they're not on the dark. We need to make sure that our policies are consistent with the National Code of Ethics. We need to avoid searching or gathering information beyond professional reasons. So that's the second time the Code of Ethics has said that, because it's super duper important. You should not collect data on clients when it's not compelling or helping their services in some way. Just because you're curious is not a warrantable reason. Avoid any posting on social media of identifying information. Again, we don't want clients to think that you're talking about them, which could negatively impact their services, which would diminish the trust and lower the likelihood of them getting the services that they could need or use in some way, shape, or form. Social worker, when transferring or disposing of the client, should do it in a way that is consistent with the governing body of your state. Again, we can't dictate. So in Michigan, it's about 7 years that you should keep a client's file. Other states could vary. So know your state's limitations and regulations around how you should keep the files and how you're supposed to dispose of them. And we need to always make sure that if a client dies, or if we die, or if we're terminated from a job, we need to make sure that the client's file is also protected. Or when we're doing documentation, if someone reads the file, they're able to know what's going on, but they don't know 100% of the things because, again, we don't want to disclose every piece of information. We never disclose any identifying information for teaching and training purposes. So when I do university lectures, I have particular clients that have let me use their information, but the name is different, age is different, race is different, gender and sexual identity are different, but the facts are there of what happened in their life, but they were okay with it. I didn't just grab clients that I thought would be cool to utilize and then breach confidentiality, because you never know the information you're disclosing. The people that hear it, they may make the connections, and then you'd be breaching confidentiality. Even though they're not your client anymore, you're still bound for X amount of time to keep their information confidential. And when we're consulting with colleagues, we should provide only the least amount of information, or if they're working with us, around this, because we don't want to overshare. And again, it's up to us to protect the client. No one else is going to do that. And we need to protect the confidentiality of a client that has passed away for the same compelling reasons. Just because someone dies doesn't mean they lose all the rights, or that their file is now an open access or open form for everyone to utilize. Moving on to the access to records, we should provide the client reasonable access to them, as long as they're not going to harm themselves or that it could be detrimental to them in any way, shape, or form. So if we feel like them knowing their records could pose a danger to them based on what is said in there, we can advocate to keep them closed, but we have to document why we're not giving them the file. So diagnosis could be super jarring for people, or the particular things that are going on outside of their situation. So some clients, depending on their developmental level or their mental cognition, may not be able to comprehend or understand the situation, and it may be more detrimental to them or for them. We need to develop and inform clients about their policies that are consistent with disclosures and standards of the use of technology again. So some agencies, you can have the client get a portal and they get access to the records outside of the agency. So we need to inform them how to do so, and we can't just keep it private. We need to take the steps to make sure that the client's file is safe, and that if a client is searching their records, they're not just doing it anywhere in any place. Again, some people don't have the cognition or capabilities of knowing what is appropriate in certain situations, so we need to be the advocate for them and informing them. sexual relationships. Under no circumstance should you be utilizing or communication and in sexual manner, having sexual contact with a client in any way, shape, or form. Bad moves, bad vibes. Just because we get close to a client doesn't mean that we can get sexual with a client. They're therapeutically there and disclosing information, vulnerable information. We're not utilizing clients for our benefit again. So 0 sexual contact with a client, no relationships with them at all. So we should not engage with anything that could pose risk to a client, that is current and former clients. And we should not have sexual relationships with people that are related to the client. Why? That's boundary confusion and very, very wonky. So do not have sexual relationships with our clients or family members of the clients or even friends with the clients, because it could potentially be dangerous to our therapeutic relationship with them. So the social workers, not the clients, bear the full burden of keeping these boundaries firm. Again, it's up to us, not the client, to not have sexual relationships or keep firm boundaries. We should not engage in sexual relationships with former clients because it could potentially be dangerous to them as well. And it's up to the social worker again, not the client, to bear the burden of keeping those boundaries and ethical conduct. We should not provide clinical services to people we've had private sexual relationships with, because that could be a very detrimental situation because you've connected with that person beyond just a therapeutic relationship. So that is the thing. No sexual relationships with our current clients, with our former clients, or family members of current or former clients in any way. So when we have physical contact with clients, we should not engage with it where there's a possibility with the result of it having a negative consequence on the person's treatment. And if we do engage in with it, make sure that it has a cultural backing and that is a cultural norm around this. Again, there's a way around that as well, because if hugging and kissing is a huge cultural thing, fist bumps are a real thing. That could be a way that you still appreciate them and give them the respect that they need or the connection they need within the culture, but not breaking our code of ethics in any way, shape, or form. And we should not sexually harass our clients, solicit our clients, or our colleagues in any way. So keep it professional, only business, never personal, never sexual, or anything like that. Never degrade our clients in any way, shape, or form. No derogatory language to describe clients. No use of disrespect towards clients. All of our communication is professional and appropriate in every facet. So if you wouldn't go up to someone that you respect or love and say it, don't say it to your client. So when the payment for the services are there, they have to be fair and reasonable to the client as well as the service is delivered. You can't fraudulently bill a 60-minute session if you saw them for 15 minutes. And you can't charge outside of the scope of what is appropriate in the area if it's outside of what you delivered. So we should avoid accepting goods except for when it is a norm of the society. So if it's a norm within the current context that we're talking about, because bargaining arrangements could be very, very easily look like we're exploiting clients and utilizing things when they're in a vulnerable spot. But social workers that accept the goods bear the full burden of having that arrangement, because it's up to us to determine what is appropriate or inappropriate for our practice. But if it's within the local community or norm, then it is okay. So we should not solicit a private fee if they're able to bill under their insurance, unless the client doesn't want to do that and they provide the written consent that they're doing a different arrangement based on the fact that they don't want their insurance to know that they are doing what is going on. So again, we're not going to step outside of what is appropriate to benefit ourselves more than that we deserve. We need to, on behalf of the client, and take reasonable steps to ensure that their rights are there, So if someone is not intellectually or cognitively there, we need to act in the best way possible for this client, for their safety, as well as them to propel further. And if someone is going to interrupt services, say we're leaving the agency or anything like that, we need to make reasonable steps to ensure the continuity of services and that the client is not going to have any negative impacts in any way, shape, or form on their services. So when I was leaving my agency back last year, I had to tell all the clients I'm leaving, and I told them like 2 months in advance. And I provided them a list of people they could go to and the different services that they aligned with and the personalities of the people. Why? Because I wanted to make sure they are informed and that the continuity of care was there and they still got the same caliber of services available to them. And when we're referring people to other professionals, we need to make sure that other professional has the specialty knowledge or competency, referring earlier, the competence to treat that person in some way, shape, or form. And we're not just going to do this on a conveniency factor. We're going to make sure it's what the client wants and that the client's still getting their needs met in some way, shape, or form. And we need to make sure that we facilitate it and take full responsibility for the transfer. We need to refer them to someone and give them all the needed information so that way they can best serve this client in some way and not just leave them in the dark and say, good luck, I'm out of here, sucker. So then we need to also prohibit giving any kickbacks, if you will, or payments for referrals to people. We don't just refer people to benefit ourselves in some way. Again, it has to have that clinical backing and benefit the client in some way. And if we're terminating services, we need to make sure that it's no longer required and that there's interest on both parties to do so. We're not just keeping people in services because it's a good conversation and we're getting paid for it. If there's no clinical backing, do not keep clients in services. But if we are going to terminate, we need to avoid abandoning clients who are still needing services. And if it has a negative impact on the person's functioning, or if there's a risk to self or others or the community or abuse and neglect going on, we're not just going to randomly throw them out of services and say, all right, that's okay, I'm still leaving. We need to make the reasonable steps to make sure that the client still gets the services and that they're informed and not having any problems. So the social worker should assist in making the appropriate arrangements to have that done. So in fee-for-service settings, we may terminate services who have overdue bills if there's no immediate danger to themselves, others, or any other circumstances that can negatively impact them. So if someone still owes you money, but they're at a danger to themselves or others, you still can't cut off services. You do a sliding fee scale or be able to accommodate them in some way, shape, or form. So the social worker should also not terminate to pursue a financial, sexual, or personal relationship with them. That can go without saying, but some people have terminated their clients so that way they can pursue that relationship with them or benefit themselves financially. I know this person's a good businessman. How about I just end the services so I don't have that dual relationship and benefit and stack some coin? Bad moves. That's not something that we're able to do. And if we anticipate the termination or interruption of services, we should notify the client promptly to seek transfer, referral, or anything like that. We're not just going to blindside a client and say, all right, one day I'm gone. And then they come into your office to see you and you're not there. That's abandonment. That could further trigger or traumatize somebody. Don't do that. And if we're leaving an employer, we need to provide the appropriate referrals or continuity of care, and the benefits need to outrisk the detriment to the client. Because if someone is going to more traumatize or not align and address the issues that the person needs, then we're not going to transfer that person to that other person. So now moving on to our responsibilities to colleagues. We need to respect them and ultimately view them for the qualifications and competencies that they have and not shun anyone away or degrade people in any way. We're all professionals. We all have vision and we all have something to contribute to the conversation in some way. We should avoid any unwarranted negative criticism of professionals if it is not evidence that it is warranted. So we should not demean people or refer to people's competence or anything that they're currently doing, or discriminate them based on their social identities. Again, we need to treat people with respect. We need to view people for what they can bring into the conversation, not for what they can't bring into the conversation. We need to cooperate with colleagues to make sure that the benefit of the client is achieved. Even though you don't like your colleague, our client is the main focus. You can't get catty just because you don't like somebody and to punish them, because you'd be punishing the client as well. And with confidentiality, any information shared by your colleagues during the course, we need to ensure that we understand and not share everything that a client or a colleague, well, a client's information that a colleague has told us, or what a colleague has told us about themselves. We're not going to share that with everyone. It was shared in confidence, so we need to keep that confidentiality. But if a colleague says they're abusing their kids or abusing someone else or want to hurt someone or hurt themselves, they are just like a client. We need to make sure that they are getting the services that they need. And if they're a danger to themselves or others or anyone else, we need to supersede in, and the right to confidentiality is gone. Social workers who are members of interdisciplinary teams need to contribute into it and utilize their expertise of the profession to make sure we're representing that. And if we're not doing that, we're negatively impacting the client and sometimes taking away from what the client could possibly do. Just because someone has a higher pay grade than us or a different license than us does not mean our judgment and our thoughts are less or our opinions around clients are invalid. We need to also engage in the team. And when ethical concerns arise, we should attempt to resolve it with the colleague first. But if not, we need to go up to the appropriate channels and get the client's needs met. Because again, it's not about us and the colleague. We need to make sure that the client's well-being is best addressed and assessed and get us where we need to go. And when we have a dispute, we always go to that colleague first. But we should not take advantage of a colleague being down and out and benefit ourselves in some way. So we're not going to be walking up to clients and degrading a colleague to make ourselves look better. Bad moves, bad vibes. We need to build people up, not bring them down. We should not exploit clients in the dispute or have them engage in inappropriate discussion around the other person, because it doesn't help. Our clients aren't people that we go to and vent to. So if we have a dispute, go to your supervisor, go to the person, and make sure you're using your clinical judgment in building people up and not bringing them down. So we should seek the advice of counsel or colleagues where it's the best interest of the client. But we need to make sure that the colleague has area of expertise and competency within that area. We're not just going to go and vent to somebody because we're frustrated. We're going there for a clinical reason, and we need to dig in their expertise. So a lot of times when people have issues with substance use, or they want to understand something more about a client that has substance use, they'll come to me and say like, hey, this is what's going on with this client, or this is what I tried. What do you think? And they know that my expertise is substance use and co-occurring disorders. So that's the thing. They're going to come to me because they know, and I will go to other people based on their expertise and what they know as well. There's no shame in the game, but we always need to make sure that what we're seeking consultation for is increasing our knowledge and competence in related to that. We're not just going and venting and processing about clients with people. We also would share the least amount of information within that situation to get the information needed. We're not sharing entire client files about this because, again, we don't do that. And then social workers who function as a supervisor, educator, or anything that could have some type of power or privilege should not engage in sexual relationships with anyone in any way, shape, or form, such as supervisees, students, trainees, or anything like that. So when I was a young supervised person, my supervisor tried having a sexual relationship with me. So I had to take the appropriate channels to get that handled. But again, I knew my code of ethics and said, this is not a good thing. So I should not pursue in this. We should avoid any sexual relationships with colleagues where there's a potential for conflict of interest, or anyone that we can become involved in could put us in a vulnerable spot, or we could be exploited in some way, shape, or form. Just with clients having conflict of interest. You can have a conflict of interest with colleagues, and it can be very detrimental, and someone can be coerced into very detrimental situations. And we should not sexually harass supervisees, colleagues, trainees, or anyone along those lines. So we should not make sexual advances, sexual solicitations, requests for sexual favors, or any verbal, written, electronic, or physical contract of any nature, any way, shape, or form. Our colleagues are not people that we should be dating or coercing in any way, shape, or form. And if we see someone not having direct knowledge or has an impairment, such as mental health or substance use, we should consult the colleague first before proceeding in any way, as long as you feel comfortable doing so. But if it's not comfortable for you and there's some detriment to you or someone else around you, we would go to a supervisor instead. And if it's the supervisor that's doing it, we'd go above their head to someone else. And if we believe that the colleague's impairment interferes with their practice and they've not taken the appropriate steps to address the impairment, and then we should take actions that would go above them, such as going to the NASW, going to your supervisor, etc. Because if they're not heeding our warning or trying to help them in some way, then we need to go above them. And if someone is not practicing in their competence, we need to go to that person first. But if they're, again, not taking the needed steps to address their incompetence, such as going to educational workshops or supervision or anything like that, we then go over their head. So if we have any conflicts with colleagues or seeing someone being incompetent, we need to go to them first. But if they're not listening or not heeding the warning and still putting clients at danger, we need to step in and do our due diligence and protect ourselves as well as the client. And if we have knowledge that someone is using unethical conduct towards people or breaking rules, we need to go and make sure we know exactly what's going on. So assess the situation. And if we know that someone's breaching policies or ethics or anything, we need to make a fair statement towards the possible licensing boards or anything like that. But we also need to be knowledgeable on who we need to go to. So making sure we're competent in that. And if someone has any unethical conduct, that we need to make sure what is going on with it. But per usual, we need to discuss issues with the colleague first when feasible. But if they're not doing this, or we believe they've acted unethical and they are not doing or changing their behavior, we may go over their head, such as, let's say they're physically harming a client. That's not going to be something that I'm going to walk up to someone and be like, hey, so you physically harm them. No, I'm going to go over their head because that's unethical behavior. Or if I know that they're having a sexual relationship with somebody and they confirm it, I'm not just going to be like, all right, please adapt your behavior and don't have sex with this person again. No, I'm going to report their behavior and get above their head. And we need to defend and assist colleagues who are unjustly charged unethically as well. So if somebody has lied about somebody, we then stand up for them and be on their side and make sure that what is going on is what is actually going on. So being an advocate for the clients as well as our colleagues. So if a client says something about a colleague and we were there and it didn't actually happen, taking that extra step and defending them. We also have responsibilities in practice settings. So supervision and consultation. So social workers who provide supervision or consultation should have the necessary knowledge and skills to provide supervision to somebody in that capacity. So if someone's coming to you for supervision and you don't have knowledge on how to do therapeutic interventions or around substance use or around any other discipline, but you're supervising them, shame on you, because you need to make sure you're competent in the area. You're not just collecting funds from somebody. So making sure that you're aware and trained ethically to make sure you're providing supervision. Plus, you need to have the right licensure as well. And if you provide supervision, making sure you have clear and appropriate boundaries. You're not going out to restaurants and partying with your supervisors, or you're not having a sexual relationship with them. So making sure it's strictly professional and keeping it business. And again, we should not engage in any dual or mutual relationships with anyone that could be viewed as like we're exploiting them or harming them in any way, shape, or form, because we don't want to put ourselves in a dangerous situation or the other person in a dangerous situation, because that could be harmful to them. And we should not provide supervision to people in an unfair manner. Just because we don't like somebody doesn't mean that we're going to negatively evaluate them and harm their career in some way, shape, or form. Education and training, and anyone that provides as an instructor, field instructor, anyone should have the appropriate areas and knowledge within what you're instructing on. Again, having that competency. So if you're not competent in an area, you can't front and be like, yeah, I know everything about this. Just be honest and say, no, I don't know that area, and I'm not just going to provide information on it, because that's unethical. And we need to evaluate students in a fair and ethical manner. Just again, if we don't know whether they're doing something right or wrong, or if we don't like somebody, doesn't mean that we can just negatively say it. But if they're not practicing ethically and we're still saying that they're doing a good job, that falls back onto our relationship. So if you're providing supervision to somebody and they're unethically practicing, that doesn't fall back just on them, falls back on you as well. And we need to make sure that they're routinely informed, meaning if you're working at an agency and you're having an intern see these clients, you need to inform the clients that they're seeing an intern or that a student in training is working with them. Most clients don't really care, but you need to make sure that they're informed, because you're not going to just throw someone under the bus and use them as an experimentation tool. And should not engage in a dual or multiple relationship with anyone that could negatively impact them in any way, shape, or form. We need to make sure we have clear boundaries. You're not friend requesting your supervisees or your trainees or your students, having those clear boundaries and keeping it moving. And when we're doing performance evaluations, we need to make sure that it's fair and considerate of what is actually being done. We're not holding people to standards that they don't know that they're being evaluated on, or we're not saying that people aren't doing things that they actually are doing and undercutting what is appropriate for them. We need to make appropriate steps to ensure that documentation is accurate and reflects the services done. We're not unethically billing, and we're not telling people to bill fraudulently on our watch. We're doing exactly what we're saying we're doing and staying in our lane. We need to provide sufficient and timely documentation. I'm not doing a session and then 3 weeks later doing the note. I'm doing the note right then or within a certain amount of time. My agency tells us that we have 3 days to finish it, which anything after 3 days, you probably don't know exactly what happened during the session. So making sure that what you're documenting actually happened, or you're doing it in a timely manner, because we're not computers and we can't process everything in a way that you're going to be able to do it. We need to protect the client's privacy to the extent as possible. So we're not telling everybody about anything, and we're not doing client notes in Starbucks as people walk by and read your computer screen. And we need to store in a way that is based on our jurisdiction of the law. And we need to make sure the appropriate number of years, relevant by whatever our state says, we keep the records. So if somebody seen us 2 years ago and the regulations are 7 years, and then they die and they want the mental health and substance use records, and we don't have them anymore, we're very, very liable, because we need to make sure what we said we were doing, we need to address and assess it. And when we're billing, we need to ensure that it's appropriate of what we actually served. We're not just saying that we billed or did things that we actually didn't do. So we need to make sure that it accurately reflects what we provided and identify for how long and who it was with. So when we're transferring clients, we need to make sure that we are getting the needed information from them and agreeing to whatever the services are. When we're referring people, we're not just throwing people into a box and saying, hey, this could probably benefit from you, and then they don't even know the referral you made, and we're just doing it so that we can get it out. When we need to make sure the possible confusion and conflict is mitigated based on the fact that we're educated and providing people information, because again, when we do that, we allow them to informed consent and have that right to determine what they want for themselves for self-determination. And if a new client has been served by another agency, we need to make sure, if it's possible, we can get them to sign a release, so that way we can increase the likelihood that they don't have to tell their story again, and we have it right in front of us. Or if we have a client referred to us, that we're actually reading the file and not having the client do what they don't want to do. So on the administrative lens, we need to advocate within and outside the agency to make sure the funds are utilizing the client's best interest and not as what convenient for us. So if we provide transportation, we're not just giving it to people that are super close to the agency because we don't want to utilize our whatever we want and make it easier for us. So it must meet the client's needs, not what we think the client's needs are. And we should advocate for the resources allocated to be open and fair. We're advertising it to everybody and not just people that we want to give it to. And we need to make sure that it's allocated to everybody. We can't just service certain funds and certain things for particular people. Everyone has a fair chance, and we're not discriminating based on any social identities or anything along those lines. And if we're denying people, we're documenting and saying why. So if somebody wants to get transportation and we see that they have a car and they're not asking for gas reimbursement and bus tickets, why are they doing so? And understanding and inquiring more. We should take reasonable steps to make sure that the resources are adequate at the agency and we're providing supervision within that. We're not just having people unethically shooting from the hip or doing services in an agency that is detrimental to the staff or the clients being served. We should take reasonable steps to ensure that the working environment is what is reasonable and consistent with the compliance within the SW Code of Ethics or our state's regulations or what is deemed appropriate for practice. We shouldn't violate or interfere with anything based on what the Code of Ethics says. So if our agency is different than the Code of Ethics, our Code of Ethics supersedes the agency policy and we can benefit ourselves by acting in compliance with the Code of Ethics rather than what our agency says. Our duty is not to our agencies, but our clients, which is generated by the Code of Ethics. In the continuing education, we must make sure that we have reasonable accommodations for us to get continuing education when possible. And if there's new emerging information, we can't restrict our colleagues or ourselves, or if our employers can't restrict their employees from getting the information. We need to make sure what we're delivering is the best and most appropriate and most current information. We're not using textbooks from the 1920s anymore. We're utilizing the new cutting edge stuff and making sure that the clients can benefit. And if anything's possible, as professionals, we need to make sure we're pursuing the best information and the newest information and not just sitting back in our offices and enjoying our times based on what we know. We're pushing ourselves and getting back in it. We generally should adhere to the commitments to employees and employers, and we should improve the employees' policies when applicable. So if we walk into an agency and we see a way that can improve the systems, we're not just going to keep silent and fall in line. We're going to advocate and benefit the employees as well as the clients. We need to take reasonable steps to make sure the Code of Ethics is followed. And if our agency is different from the Code of Ethics, we advocate for our practice and our profession to make sure that we are compliant with the NSW Code of Ethics. We should not allow an employee policies and procedures interfere with our ethical practice. Again, I kind of already said this, but the Social Worker Code of Ethics supersedes our agency's policies. We need to act and prevent any discrimination in any way, shape, or form. So if we see it, see something, say something, be something, we should accept the arrangements and field placements only that exercise fair and ethical practices. Again, if our agency can't hold the students or trainees, we're not going to just accept them and have them filing. We need to get them better trained and better competent so that way that when they walk into it, we're able to do it. We need to be due diligent stewards about resources. We're not just wasting funds and blowing funds on things that we think are cool. They're benefiting clients, benefiting employees, as well as our profession in general. We're not just buying a $10,000 car just because we think it would be cool. We need to have a need for it in all of these things. We're not going to buy a $20,000 projector just because we want to say that we have it. It's benefiting our agency in some way. And when we engage in organized formations of labor unions or anything to benefit our working conditions as well as clients. So if there's any issues arising within our profession or within other professions, we need to advocate on behalf of it to make sure that our clients are being served in the best way possible. And if we're engaged in any labor management disputes or anything, we need to make sure that we fall within our ethical standards. We're not degrading anyone. We're not bringing anyone down. We're not slandering anyone. We're doing it appropriately. We're doing it ethically, and we're doing it behaviorally. And if there's reasonable differences amongst people, we need to make sure that we come to an agreement. And if there's an actual threat of this, we need to be careful and make sure that the issues don't impact our clients. Because again, our clients are our main factors, not ourselves, not any other thing. We need to make sure our clients are benefited and they're getting served in some way, shape, or form. Now, our obligations to the profession in general, we need to accept only employment that we're qualified for. Like I said, I'm a therapist and I know therapeutic modalities like the back of my hand and substance use and co-occurring disorders. You're not going to see me doing like hospital work because I don't have any experience in the hospital work. So I'm not going to go and pursue it and then be like, yeah, I have 20 years of experience in this thing. I'm going to be like, hey, this is my knowledge and expertise in these other areas, but I'm not going to walk in there and lie to people. We need to strive to become and remain proficient in professional practice by pursuing any new literature or any new information or modalities or anything, and making sure that we're participating in continuing education. And if you're fully licensed, you have those requirements based on your state. So make sure you keep up with that because we're better for it and you are better as well for it. And we should base practice on recognized knowledge and empirical knowledge. We're not just coming up with random modalities and saying this is the new cutting edge stuff. There has to be evidence, research, and making sure that we're not harming our clients indirectly based on what we think is appropriate for them. And we should not practice, condone, or facilitate any discrimination based on any social identities because we accept everyone for where they're at and who they are. And we're not telling people what is appropriate for them. We listen to them, guide them, and help them in any way, shape, or form. And we should not permit the private conduct that could impede our ability to be professional or have our professional lens or anything. We should not participate or be dishonest or fraud or any deception. We're being honest and advocating and working for people and mobilizing and making sure we're all on the same page to benefiting our profession in general. And if someone's impaired, we should not let our own personal problems, legal problems, anything happening outside of the agency impact our ability. Again, our outside lives end right once we walk into the office. Just because you're having hardships at home does not mean we walk in and treat our clients any different. And if we do have that, we need to seek services to benefit ourselves in some way. We need to seek professional help to protect our clients and reduce the likelihood that they get harmed in any way, shape, or form. So if you're having issues, seek out the services that can help benefit you in some way, shape, or form. And we should never misrepresent ourselves and make clear distinction about what is possible for and with us. And the biggest thing that we have is we have people misrepresenting what is possible for them. Test prepping programs saying that they have a 99% chance of passing, and if you don't pass, it's your fault, not theirs. Again, don't misrepresent things to swoon and manipulate and benefit yourself in some way, shape, or form. And when we speak on behalf of the profession, do it in an accurate and appropriate manner. We're not degrading people indirectly, and we're not jabbing at people where it's not substantiated. And we need to ensure that when we represent clients or anything public, that we're being honest. Again, like I said, I'm not saying that I'm a licensed clinical social worker if I don't actually have it. Or I'm not saying that I'm an expert in animal therapy if I've never done it. I'm representing myself in the best way that I know how. And I only claim my relevant experience and not things that I wish that I had. I'm not saying that I have a PhD because I've never done a PhD program. I'm not calling myself Dr. Phil if that's not what I have. We should not engage in uninvited solicitation of potential clients because their circumstances are vulnerable. Again, I'm not manipulating. I'm not molding. I'm not coercing people into benefiting myself in some way, shape, or form. We should not engage in the solicitation of testimonial endorsements, not paying people to say things good about you, or not telling people to do things based on the fact that they need your services and help, and you're not willing to help them unless they lie and benefit you in some way. And we should not take responsibility or credit of other people's stuff. We need to give credit where credit's due, and if it's not yours, hand swat, give it to somebody else. People should honestly acknowledge the work of and contributions of other people. So if I had somebody else helping me develop this and telling me what to say or making my videos or anything like that, I'd give credit. I wouldn't say Phil's doing 100% of the stuff, but since I'm doing it all by myself, I give myself all of the credit. But if I had someone else helping me, I would have to give them credit in some way. And we should work towards the maintenance and promotion of high standards within practice. Again, a lot of times when people get fully licensed, they just become stagnant and focus on their practice and not how we can advance people in some way. We should uphold and advance the ethics, knowledge, and mission of the profession, and not just sitting back in what we think is cool, but keeping the integrity and keeping pushing forward. And if people need assistance, helping them in some way, shape, and form, and helping contribute to the profession in some way. And we should contribute time and professional expertise to promote the ethics, values, and these activities, our teaching, research, etc. So my way of giving back to the profession was creating a YouTube channel, helping people that can't pass the licensure exam or people that are new to the licensure exam pass it and get it done. Also, going to the universities and sharing competent, relevant, and experience to help mobilize the next generation of social workers. So I'd urge you guys all to find a way to give back in some way, shape, or form to the profession or help mobilize and empower other people in some way. We should contribute to the knowledge base of the social work by sharing with our colleagues at conferences and meetings and presentations and all of that stuff. That's why I'm a huge proponent of giving back and making sure that we're pushing and propelling each other further. Because if we're not doing that, who is going to do it? And when you need to prevent the unauthorized or unqualified practice of social work. So if you see someone practicing unethically or sharing information that you know is irrelevant or very detrimental to people, call it out, share it out, and get it out. And we should monitor and evaluate practices. So if you're into research, I'm particularly not, but if you are, make sure you're doing that, making sure the programs and stuff that you are doing at your agency is into that, making sure you're using only empirically backed data. We should promote and facilitate evaluation. And we should critically examine the emerging issues and not just accepting things for face value. Since social media and things are very, very rampant, a lot of times people are starting to accept everything that they've heard rather than looking back and making questions and understanding why people are saying the things that they are. And if we are engaged in this, we need to make sure that we're using appropriate review boards and not just putting out jaded information based on what we want to see people and tell people and benefit ourselves from it. And we need to obtain voluntary and written consent from people when appropriate, when we're evaluating or they're part of a research study. So without that, we cannot tell people you're doing this or else, because we need to give them the integrity and dignity to decline and have that informed consent piece and allow and make sure they know what's about to happen and what they're engaged in and what they're doing in the research study. And if they're vulnerable, we can't just exploit them. So when using electronic technology during this, we need to inform them as well. And we need to assess whether the participants are able to use the technology and whether or not they can. And if they can't, we need to find reasonable replacements for that. So again, making sure people are informed as well as making sure they know exactly what's going to go on with and for them during the research study. And we need to make sure that they're possibly able to give that consent. And if not, we need to get an assent form, which is people for under the ages of 18 or if they have a cognitive disability. But if they're not able to consent, we can't let them in the research study, whether they're in the research study or not. Prior to that, if they lose their ability to consent, we can't include and have them in the research study. We should never design or conduct an evaluation that does not use consent procedures because, again, we don't want to coerce people in there and we don't want to tell people that you have to do something and we want them to be there. And we're not going to force people to do things in any way, shape, or form. And we need to equally make sure that if they don't want to consent, we give them an option to opt out at any time. So it's not a 100% shot. Once you sign up, you're imprisoned to it or proclamated to it. You need to make sure what they're doing is what they want to keep doing. And at any time, someone can withdraw because we want to give them that chance. And we can't penalize them for not wanting to be in our research study. So if they want to opt out, we have to give them what we guaranteed them at the point in time and then move on with our day. So social workers should take appropriate actions to make sure that people are supported. So people are experiencing distress during a research study that have like a social worker or a clinical person there to be able to process and get them back into the appropriate functionings. And we need to make sure that we have the best benefit of the person, not our own research or information. And if we're doing this research study, we need to make sure that there's no physical or mental distress or deprivation or danger to the person. And if there is, we're going to stop the research study and stabilize the person and make sure they're at the best functioning possible. And we need to make sure we tell them what the data is going to be used for and that it's for a professional realm, not a personal reason, and that we're not just doing this for fun. We're telling them what's going to happen with this and where it's going to take people. And if we do it, we need to ensure the anonymity or make sure that it's anonymous and confidential. We need to inform them of all the information or limits to it, and that we're going to be sharing the information in some way, shape, or form, but the identifying information is going to be destroyed. So it's just the information that we gather around the research study, not who they are, what's going on with them, and that we'll be able to trace it back. We need to make sure that we protect the person's confidential information and we admit it during the research study. And if we evaluate, we need to make sure that it's accurate. We can't skew data or we can't falsify something to make our images look better than they actually are. If something didn't work, you have to say it didn't work and then go from there. A lot of times people aren't willing to sit on the sword and say like, hey, this didn't work for X, Y, and Z reason. So that's the thing that we have to do. So if you're doing this, we need to be alert and avoid conflicts of interest or dual relationships with the participants. And if we see it, we tell them to go to a different research study or we admit it, or we don't put them on our caseload if it's a randomized trial and we figure that out later. But we need to make sure that the primary interest is of the participant, not our own. We should educate ourselves around what the particular research practices are. I'm not conducting a research study based on the seam of my pants. I'm actually qualified and able to do the research. And then the last category, to the broader society. So we need to promote the general welfare of society and make sure that there's no discrepancies or indifference and people have equity, not just equality, equity on based on what they need to know. So people need to have their human rights. We need to promote economic and political and cultural institutions, making sure that no one's being discriminated against or degraded in any way, shape, or form, and making sure we're advocating based on that. We need to facilitate informed participation in public forums and institutions. So voting, making sure your voice is heard and advocating for people that don't have a voice and standing open with and for them. And we need to provide appropriate services in public emergencies. So let's say there's a huge mental health crisis and there's a huge influx and people need help. Me as a mental health clinician would have to volunteer my services to make sure that in this emergency that I'm mitigating the harm and making sure people are getting the needs met. That's my obligation, and that is my role to make sure that the world is in a better mental health function than when I found it. And we need to engage in social and political actions to ensure that everyone has equal access to everything and that the political arena is my avenue to make sure that human justices are being met. So if I know that people are rightfully being discriminated against and people aren't getting the needed services and benefits that they can need, I need to stand up, I need to vote, I need to advocate, I need to benefit people in some way. And we need to act to and expand the choice of opportunities for all people, regardless of their vulnerability, disadvantage, depression, or any exploitation of any groups of people or people in general. We need to treat people as equals and making sure that people are getting the services that they need, want, and making sure that we're not restricting it based on a political agenda or any discrimination or oppression of any social identities that exist in the world. And we should promote the conditions that encourage respect and diversity and competence amongst everyone. Everyone should be treated as a human being, and differences amongst cultures or difference against social identity should not be held against people in any way, shape, or form. And I need to be doing my due diligence to stand up and make sure that I'm promoting policies to make sure that there's no one being oppressed against in any way, shape, or form. And key emphasis on the rights and equity. Equity meaning everyone gets what they need. Equality meaning everyone gets the same thing. We need to act to prevent the domination, exploitation of anyone on social identity in any way, shape, or form. We need to be mobilizing people to benefit people and not discriminate anyone. And now, moving into the last section, abuse and neglect. Abuse is an intentional infliction of physical or emotional injury on a dependent child anyone under the ages of 18, or anyone who has a cognitive disability, as well as anyone a part of the elder population 65 or older. And neglect is the failure of a parent or caregiver, key emphasis on parent or caregiver, to provide the basic needs of a dependent child, anyone under the ages of 18, someone with a cognitive disability, or anyone a part of the elder population 65 or older. So I'm going to steam through the types of abuse, and then we will get into our questions after we go over when you should refer and when you should seek supervision. So the physical abuse is any intentional, key emphasis on intentional or non-accidental injury to a dependent child, someone with a cognitive disability, or someone a part of the elder population. So such examples are hitting, striking, kicking, burning, biting, uses of any force to degrade or harm someone. So indications of abuse, if you see these in the questions or in practice, huge indicators that there's a problem. Unexplained bruises on the person, presence of burns on the person's body, multiple episodes of broken bones or fractures, unexplained head injuries or marks or damage to the mouth or face area. A person provides multiple stories to explain an injury they have sustained or provides differing information from the parent or caregiver. Psychological or emotional abuse, intentional injury, key emphasis on intentional. Again, to the psychological capacity or emotional stability of the person as evidenced by an observable or substantial change in behavior or emotional response, or intentional use of inappropriate behavior towards a person aimed at degrading, isolating, humiliating, or threatening the emotional well-being of the person in general. So, for example, a caregiver tells their elder parent that they are useless and they should just die already, or a parent tells their child that they are stupid and that they are always going to be a failure since they did not pass an exam they had. Most times, people shrug emotional abuse or psychological abuse off because it's not physical abuse. Being aware of when you should report and when you should not. So, indicators of psychological or emotional abuse. Person will have increased anxiety or hypervigilance in relationships or social interactions. Person may find it difficult to establish relationships and trust others. Person may find it difficult to have social or sports or engage with the social supports if they are present. Again, not trusting people to have their best interest in heart. Person has unexplained delays in cognition or comprehension, and increased irritability and frequent fights with others when they feel they are being challenged. Sexual abuse. When an adult or caregiver engages in inappropriate sexual involvement with a child, individual with a cognitive disability, or someone of the elder population, anyone can be perceived as vulnerable. But if the person is over the 18, it is up to them whether they want to pursue it or not. So examples here: sexual talk, sexting, sending or receiving nude photographs, physical contact with a person, touching, oral or penetrable intercourse. This can involve having the vulnerable person watch sexual content without their willingness or knowledge or consent to do so. So this would be like you had a young child and they're watching pornographic video with someone that is older than them. The kid doesn't even know what's going on, but they're still watching. Indications of sexual abuse: developmental regression such as bedwetting, defecating on oneself, claiming a caregiver or people they care about for support in a developmentally inappropriate manner. So let's say we have like a 12-year-old kid cuddling up to their parent because they're afraid. Person has increased fear or anxiety in particular situations or around particular people who have abused them or witnessed the abuse and did nothing, kind of having that detachment or overcompensation. Person may have sleep disturbances or nightmares, and person may act out sexually or perform sexual acts on toys or other people in their age group, such as young children or abusing other kids unknowingly. You tend to repeat what you don't know or what was normative for you growing up. Bruising or scarring on genitals or private area, or sexual transmitted diseases or infections or medical conditions associated with the engagement of sexual behaviors or acts. Financial abuse, when someone is exploited for money or they are not being given the financial means or resources to get their needs met. Additionally, they're not being given money that they are entitled to. again, super duper overlooked because people think, oh, they only have a certain amount of money they're given, so no wonder they have financial struggles. But if someone has control of their money and they're not giving it to someone, even though, as long as it's not a danger to self or others, meaning they're not giving them money because they know that they're going to do something that can hurt themselves, then that's a different story. But again, very, very prevalent and very, very dangerous. Considerations when answering an abuse question. The way you react is dependent on who told you the information and how you receive the information. So the two biggest categories would be if someone other than the person being abused told you, and then the second one would be if the person that abused the person or the person being abused told you. So we'll do the first one first. So if a teacher, parent, friend, or neighbor, colleague, anyone who is not the victim of the abuse or the perpetrator of the abuse tells you, you always speak to the person who is abused, or you visit them in person to gather your own insight on the potentials of abuse and neglect. And you would only do the observation if they're too young or unable to communicate. You would visually investigate the situation. You need to make sure what you see is what is actually happening. After you get the information, then you report to APS and CPS. We don't assume anything in any situation because we don't want to paint a picture that is not actually there. So when the person who was abused or the perpetrator of the abuse tells you the information directly, you always go to the appropriate authorities, CPS or APS. So when you seek out supervision, this list is not exhaustive, but quick considerations. When the person does not have the appropriate education or feels uncomfortable in a particular situation, whenever the social worker has a reaction of a previous experience similar to the client's that could get in the way of their treating of the client, countertransference. Whenever someone feels like they're missing something or the supervisor could provide insight and or assistance in a client's situation, again, you have a little bit of experience, but you're not sure. And when in doubt, seek guidance. When you do not seek supervision, again, this is not every scenario, but just a couple of situations that could help you in some way. Whenever the social worker has the needed information and expertise to treat the clients. So if you don't have any questions or gaps in services, you wouldn't need supervision. Whenever the client brings in something to the therapeutic relationship that could prevent the progress, they're making sexual advances or anything like that, you can't really go to a supervisor and supervise that out because it's something outside of you. So this would require the social worker to refer the person out instead. And your supervisor should have the expertise, credentials, and experience to assist you in your practice. If they do not, they're they're not ethically practicing, so they're unethical in their behaviors. Question 1. A social worker at a community health agency sees a client from their substance use group get out of a colleague's car. The social worker has reported this colleague's behavior to her supervisor on 2 separate occasions regarding other clients in the past, but nothing happened as a result of her efforts. The social worker feels uncomfortable with the colleague's actions. What should the social worker do first? A. Report the colleague's behavior to the clinical supervisor. B. Talk to the colleague about the situation. C. Report the colleague to the social work licensing board. D. Ignore the action since this is appropriate behavior. And when you have your answer, type the word Michigan in the chat. Opening the polls. 30 more seconds. Just closing down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is C. Third place is A. No one thought D. Let's look at it. So, social worker, community mental health agency. Client from her substance use group gets out of her colleague's car. The social worker has reported this colleague's behavior to her supervisor on 2 separate occasions in the past. Nothing has happened as a result of her efforts. The social worker feels uncomfortable with the colleague's behavior. So, what should we do here? So, this is definitely going to be a very, very tricky situation. So, we're going to rule out D because we're not just going to ignore it. Why? We're uncomfortable with this. So, when you're uncomfortable with things, you're not just going to let it sit and roll. And with this, we're not going to report this person to the social work licensing board because the key emphasis is that they were 2 separate occasions in the past. I can't bring up the past and put this colleague in that situation. I can always follow the same processes based on the fact of this is a new situation. So if this is a new situation, I need to follow the same chain of command, and that chain of command is talk to the colleague first. If they don't adjust their behavior, then I can go to the supervisor and above. Because why is this person getting out of the colleague's car? Was the colleague supposed to transport them? What was going on? What was the time of day? We always want to go to the colleague to understand the situation around this. It did not say that we were afraid of the colleague or anything. We're just uncomfortable around the behavior. And when there's discomfort, we need clarification. And with clarification comes comfort and competency. So the correct answer here is we're going to talk to the colleague. But if this was one of the previous situations and the colleague didn't amend their behavior, then we are going to go to the supervisor. But this is a new situation, and new situations need a new lens and a new chance. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 2. A social worker working at a nonprofit outpatient clinic just completed an intake assessment with a 70-year-old man and a 65-year-old wife. They reported having relationship problems due to the decrease in their sex life. The woman reports that she feels like her husband is no longer attracted to her and that he does not want to be around her much. The man reports he is sexually attracted to his wife and that he does not see any issues in the relationship. The social worker has very little experience in couples therapy, but feels like he can handle the case. What is the best action for the social worker to take? A. Schedule another appointment with the couple to help them improve their relationship. B, provide information on healthy relationship dynamics to best equip the clients for couples therapy. C, refer the couple to another therapist with more experience with helping with couples. D, schedule another appointment with the couple and seek supervision to address any issues that arise. And when you have your answer, type the word water in the chat. Opening the polls. 25 more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is C and D. Second place is B. Third place is A. Let's look at it. Social worker, outpatient clinic. We just completed an intake assessment, so it's the first time us seeing this couple. And they are 70-year-old man, 65-year-old wife. They reported having relationships and their issues due to their sex life. The woman reports that she finds her husband doesn't find her attractive anymore, and he doesn't want to be around her as much. The man says he is sexually attracted to her, and he sees no issues in the relationship whatsoever. The social worker has very little of experience, but feels like he can handle the case. So this one is going to be an application reasoning question. Why? Clinical situation, we have to respond to it, but it is also ethically driven. So we can utilize the acronym here. So schedule another appointment with the couple to help them improve their relationship. That one is going to be an intervene because it's an action on our end to progress the services. Provide information on healthy relationship dynamics to best equip the clients for couples therapy. Educate. Refer the couple to another therapist with more experience with helping couples. Refer. And schedule another appointment with the couple and seek supervision to help address any issues that arise. Intervene. So, quick review, outpatient clinic. We just completed an intake assessment. So it's the first time us seeing them. And they are not on the same page, and we have very little experience. And again, when we have very little experience, we're not going to ship them out. We can seek supervision to improve ourselves, but it has to be appropriate within the context of where we're at in the services. So we're not going to refer them out because we have a basis of knowledge we can utilize to help the clients and progress in some way. And we're not just automatically going to schedule an appointment to help improve the relationship. There's stuff that is outstanding that could possibly get in the way. So we just completed an intake assessment. So we probably do not have any issues that have arisen because hopefully we know how to complete an intake and refer people over. But the couple is not on the same page. And the way that we'd get them on the same page is to provide them information to gauge where they're at and what they would like to accomplish from services. Remember, we have to inform clients about their services before we can get their informed consent around them being able to engage in services. We should not have any issues arise yet because we just completed an intake assessment. And we're not going to refer them out because we have the needed experience or a little experience, and we could seek supervision to supplement that. And we just want to schedule another appointment because we don't know what the clients want to accomplish and whether they want to continue to engage in the services. So that is how we look at that question in particular. Question 3. A social worker is working with a 26-year-old female that was recently involved in a domestic violence situation with her boyfriend. The client discussed how the incident resulted in her being hospitalized. The social worker was previously in an abusive relationship, but does not feel like her previous experience will get in the way of treating the client. What is the best action for the social worker to take in this situation? A. Disclose the social worker's own experience to help the client feel less alone in her situation. B. Inform the client that the social worker is going to refer her to a different therapist that could better treat her. C. Continue treating the client, seek supervision to help address any countertransference that arrives. D. Continue treating the client and consult with coworkers with any struggles she experiences. And when you have your answer, type the word tricky in the chat. Opening the polls. Thirty more seconds. Slapping the polls shut. The majority think it is C. Second place is A and B. No one thought D. Let's look at it. Social worker, 26-year-old female, recently involved in a domestic violence situation with her boyfriend. The client discussed how it resulted in her being hospitalized. Social worker was previously in an abusive relationship, but does not feel like her experience will get in the way of treating this woman. What is the best thing for the social worker to take in this situation? Quick review: 26-year-old female, domestic violence situation. She was hospitalized. Social worker has previous experience in a DV situation. So we're going to rule out A because we're not going to self-disclose, because it's not going to help the client feel more connected to us or like she's not alone, because we're only going to disclose in particular situations. But this isn't about us. She didn't say she's struggling. We're the ones that had the previous experience, and we need to respond to that. The client just gave us a little bit of information. Us self-disclosing takes this light and emphasis off the client and puts it on us. Bad moves, bad vibes. So we're not going to refer this lady out because nothing has happened. This lady just told us about a trauma, and if we refer her out, we're basically telling her, go and tell someone else about this trauma. I can't handle this. Bad moves, because this client came for help. And if we interrupt the services based on what we think is best, we still have the experience. It doesn't say that we have no experience in trauma services. So we would not refer them out. And we're not going to seek consultation. Yes, we can talk to colleagues about it, but if we have access to a supervisor that is going to be on our side, and the biggest thing here is the countertransference. It's like yelling at us. Us having previous experience, it may not get in the way, but if it does, it's always good to have this. So that is how you look at that question in particular. Question 4. A social worker in an outpatient clinic just recently terminated services with a 26-year-old client who she had been working with for 1 year. The client's therapist worked on positive ways for the client to establish positive relationships in his life. The social worker received a friend request on Facebook from the client. What is the most appropriate action for the social worker to take? A. Accept the friend request because it shows therapeutic progress on the client's end. B. Accept the friend request to allow for the social worker to stay connected with the client. C. Decline the friend request since it is unethical for the social worker to have relationships with the client. And D. Decline the friend request since it would be unethical for the social worker to stay connected with the client. And when you have your answer, type the word chat in the chat. Opening the polls. Thirty more seconds. Slapping the polls shut. The majority think it is C. Second place is D. No one thought A or B. Let's look at it. So we're in an outpatient clinic. We just recently terminated services with a 26-year-old client, and we saw them for 1 year. Any length of time, jump on it. We worked on ways to develop positive relationships in his life, and we received a Facebook notification from the client. What should we do in this situation? So, quick review: outpatient clinic, recently terminated services, 26-year-old client, wanted to develop positive relationships, and we have terminated them. We get a Facebook notification. So we're going to rule out A and B because we're not going to accept a friend request on any length of our imagination. So we have to figure out, are we going to decline it since it's unethical for the social worker to have relationships with the client, or are we going to decline because we can't stay connected? So the main difference here is it unethical to have relationships or stay connected with a client? So within this, they're very, very closely related, but the heavier emphasis, we can stay connected to the clients on a professional realm. Meaning, let's say a client calls us and wants to update us on our services. We're not slamming the phone in their ear and saying, I can't talk to you. Because if a client wants to stay connected and let us know on a professional lens or professional reasons, we can do so. We cannot engage outside of that professional realm to develop a personal relationship with them. So that's how we look at that question in particular. So it would be C, decline the friend request since it is unethical for the social worker to have relationships with the client. We can stay connected for professional reasons, but anything outside of that, such as the relationship, bad moves, bad vibes. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 5. Social worker in an outpatient clinic has completed an intake assessment with a couple and their 2 children who recently immigrated. When the social worker inquired about substance use in the family, the parents report that alcohol use is a part of the traditions of their country of origin. The parents report that they will drink alcohol as a family and at times will become intoxicated. What would be the best thing for the social worker to do in this situation? A, provide information on the family on the negative impacts that alcohol can have on them. B, contact Child Protective Services. C, continue with the intake assessment and research the family's country of origin to be better prepared for the next session. D, respect the family's cultural beliefs and continue to identify what the family would like to work on. When you have your answer, type the word happy in the chat. Opening the polls. Thirty more seconds. Closing the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is D. Third place is C. Fourth place is A. Let's look at it. Social worker, outpatient clinic, completed an intake assessment, first time, couple, 2 children, they recently immigrated. The social worker inquired about family use, substance use, and the family said it is a part of their country of origin. The parents say that they'll drink as a family. Everyone becomes intoxicated. So this would be an application question because it's a clinical situation that we have to respond to. So quick review, outpatient clinic, intake assessment, first time seeing them, couple, 2 children, and the family will become intoxicated and it's a part of their country of origin. So let's break it down. Provide information to the family on the negative impacts that alcohol can have on them. Educate. Contact Child Protective Services, safety, or intervene, depending on how we want to look at it. Continue with the intake assessment and research the family's country of origin to be better prepared. Intervene why we're doing something to progress the therapeutic interaction, and respect the family's cultural beliefs and continue to identify what the family would like to work on. Intervene because we are continuing on with the assessment. So with that, we're going to rule out just continue with the assessment and research later on because they just told us that they drink as a family. And we're not going to just respect the cultural beliefs because there's potential harm to self, others, abuse, and neglect. And since it is substance use and they are all drinking as a family and becoming intoxicated, this is actually going to be a safety option because that means everyone in the family is doing it. So the children are doing it as well. And if they're not, the parents are drinking around the kids and they're not able to supervise as appropriately. So providing information on the negative impacts isn't going to change anything because think about if someone told you that one of the behaviors that you do on a consistent basis is a bad move and bad vibes, you're probably still going to do the behavior anyway. So we're going to contact CPS because yes, they are recently immigrated, but that doesn't mean that we can just have an exemption. Once you come into the United States, you follow the rules and regulations, and we need to protect the children. So that's how we'd look at that question in particular. So it would be B, contact Child Protective Services. Question 6. Social worker at an outpatient clinic has been working with a 45-year-old female for 8 months. The woman engaged in services after a breakup she had with her boyfriend of 4 years. The woman has been working on ways to engage in healthy relationships and to set boundaries with others. The social worker and woman agreed it's time for services to terminate. On their last appointment, The woman gives the social worker a coin that her grandfather gave her and told her to give it to someone who she admires. What would be the best way for the social worker to respond? A, accept the gift as it would be more detrimental to decline the gift. B, thank the client for her generosity and inform her why it would be unethical to accept the gift. C, thank the client for her generosity and gather information on the meaning of the gift. D, decline the gift. And when you have your answer, type the word lions in the chat. Opening the polls. Thirty more seconds. Closing down the polls. The majority think it is C. Close second is B. Third place is A and D. Let's look at it. Social worker, outpatient clinic, working with a 45-year-old female, 8 months, again, any length of time, jump on it. Woman engaged in services after a breakup she had with her boyfriend of 4 years. Woman has been working on ways to engage in healthy relationships and set boundaries with others. Social worker and woman agree services should be terminated, so we're on the same page. When the woman gives the social worker a coin that her grandfather gave her and said, give it to someone she admires. So, quick review, outpatient clinic, 45-year-old female. We've been doing this for 8 months. She engaged in services because her boyfriend of 4 years broke up with her. We think it's a good way for her to terminate because she's identified information to set healthy boundaries and get into healthy relationships. She hands us a coin that her grandfather gave her and told her to give it to someone she admires. So we're automatically going to rule out decline the gift because we can't just outright slap the coin out of our hands and say, I'm not touching this coin ever again, because there's steps that we have to do prior to that. And we're not going to just randomly accept the gift because, again, we don't know what the coin is for or why she gave it to us, or is it a part of our ethics to be able to do so. So the B and C are very, very similar because thank the woman for the generosity and thank the woman for the generosity. So do we want to gather information first, or do we want to inform her of something? So gathering information is going to be an assess, and then giving her information is going to be educate. So based on that, we always want to gather information rather than telling people information first. So we're going to rule out B because we don't know what the coin means. What does it mean for her to admire? Is this coin worth $1 million? Is this coin something that is very, very common in her community? Did she make the coin? what's going on with the coin. So we want to figure out what's the meaning and all of those things, because at the end of the day, it may be against the ethics to decline it because it could be more detrimental in the relationship. But we need more information prior to being able to do so, because again, we don't know any information about the coin, and we don't need to do something that is against ethical code, but we also don't want to be presumptuous and do something that could be detrimental. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 7. Social worker at a community mental health clinic is working with a 16-year-old female who reports struggling with symptoms of depression. The girl reports that she recently had a fight with one of her friends over a boy that she likes. The social worker remembers her son telling her about two girls fighting over him. Upon further discussion, the social worker's son is the boy of interest. However, the social worker believes that she can still effectively work with the client. What would be the best thing for the social worker to do in this situation? A, continue to work with the client since she believes there's no issue. B, discuss the information to the client and allow for her to have self-determination in her own treatment. C, refer the client to another therapist at the agency. D, continue to see the client and seek supervision around the issue. When you have your answer, type the word Wolverine in the chat. Opening the polls. Thirty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is C. Second place is D. Third place is B. Fourth place is A. Let's look at it. Social worker, community mental health clinic, working with a 16-year-old female struggling with symptoms of depression. The girl reports she recently had a fight with one of her friends over the boy she likes. Social worker remembers her son telling her about two girls fighting over him. The social worker's son is the boy of interest. The social worker believes she can still effectively work with the woman. So, quick review: community mental health clinic, 16-year-old female, symptoms of depression. She had a fight with her friends over a boy. Social worker's son's the boy. Social worker thinks she can handle it. So, we're going to rule out A. Just because someone thinks they can handle a case doesn't mean they actually can do it. And that could actually be more detrimental to the client because, again, this is where we need to be understanding what's going on in the situation, because this could actually potentially harm the client if we don't address what is going on. We're going to rule out B because, again, people have the right to self-determination, but are we really going to give this woman the option to say, hey, my son's the boy that you want to be in a relationship with? Because this girl could say, okay, I have an in with this boy and I know I'm going to get in a relationship with him. So she could utilize us to get to our son, or Let's say the son starts dating her and now she's sitting at your front porch and sitting at the dinner table eating with you. We don't want our clients that close to us. That's bad moves and it's a poopy situation and poop smells. So, do we want to refer to someone else or do we want to seek supervision? And I kind of already said, we're not going to seek supervision. We can't control that this woman likes our son. And we're not going to continue seeing this woman because let's say we do and they start dating and then we have to refer out and we're a year down the road. That's way too long for us to have a therapeutic relationship. For the sole fact, it's going to be C, refer the client to another therapist because this is a dual relationship. It can potentially conflict of interest in some way. So we want to mitigate the instances of conflict of interest in dual relationships because we don't want to harm the client in some way, shape, or form. That's how we'd look at that question in particular. Question 8. Social worker at a family agency is meeting with a couple who have been having problems in their marriage. Social worker has been working with the couple to identify ways to improve their communication. Social worker receives a subpoena from the wife's lawyer requesting the treatment records because the wife plans to divorce her husband. The wife provides a release of information for the records. What should the social worker do in this situation? A, release the records to the lawyer since there's a release for information. B, contact the husband and inform him of the subpoena request. C, assert privilege on behalf of the husband and deny that the couple is being treated. D, release only the part of the records that includes the wife's treatment. And when you have your answer, type the word hope in the chat. Opening the polls. Thirty more seconds. Closing down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is D. Third place is C. Fourth place is A. Let's look at it. So, family agency meeting with the couple because they're having problems in their marriage. Social worker has been working with the couple to identify communication. Social worker receives a subpoena from the wife's lawyer requesting the records because the wife plans to divorce the husband. The wife provides a release of information. Key emphasis on the wife. So, quick review, family agency, there's a couple problems in their marriage. We're working on communication. We receive a subpoena from the wife's lawyer. The wife plans, so it's not announced yet, to divorce her husband. The wife provides a release of information. So we are going to rule out A because we only have half of a disclosure. We only have half of a release of information. We are working with a couple. So we can't just rule and give the records because we only have the wife's consent. So, with that, we're also going to rule out D because we can't just give half of the records. We're working with a couple here. What are we going to do? Just white out the husband's name? Because when you're working with a couple, they're both involved. So our documentation has them both in it. And we're not just going to paint a picture based on one person's observation, because that'd be like working with a client and only providing information that is positive about them when they have a lot of records of them being psychosis and trying to kill someone and hurt people in some way, shape, or form. We don't paint half-stroked pictures. We paint the whole picture. And yes, we're going to disclose the least amount of information, but in this case, the client is not the woman, it is the couple. Therefore, are we going to contact the husband and say, hey, I don't know if you know this or not, but your wife's going to divorce you. So can I release the records to the lawyer so you guys can get a divorce? Or am I going to say, I can't confirm or deny that there are clients here because I only, and then that's where you'd stop. So we're going to rule out contacting the husband because I'm not going to call a couple and say, hey, your wife's divorcing you. That's starting a fire. Let's say this guy has a homicidal history. Wife gets home, he blows her head off her shoulders. Bad moves, bad vibes, and the goal here is communication. So if the wife wants the records disclosed, she needs her husband on the same page, and you would prompt the wife to bring it up in session so that way we can de-escalate and work from there. So we're going to assert privilege. Why? Because it's a subpoena from a lawyer and we have half of a release of information. So that's how we look at that question in particular. It would be C, assert privilege on behalf of the husband and deny that the couple is being treated. Question 9. The social worker has been working with a 40-year-old male for the past month around the issues of anger. Social worker has been finding it difficult to establish rapport with the man since he does not provide much details about himself. Before the most recent session, the social worker is called to the lobby because the man got angry and threw a chair at the secretary. What should the social worker do next in this situation? A, contact the appropriate authorities and pry all the details about the man to them. B, contact the appropriate authorities and provide the least amount of information about the situation. C, suggest the front desk contact the authorities to ensure that this situation does not impact the therapeutic relationship. D, suggest the front desk contact the authorities to prevent break-in confidentiality. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you learned from our session so far. Opening the polls. Thirty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is C and D. Third place is A. So let's look at it. Social worker working with a 40-year-old male. Past a month, any length of time, hop on top of it. He has issues with anger. Social worker is finding it difficult to establish rapport. He does not provide much details. Before the most recent session, so has not happened yet, the social worker is called to the lobby. The man got angry, threw a chair at their secretary. So, quick review, working with a 40-year-old male, 1 month of time, issues with anger. We're finding it difficult to establish rapport. He's not providing much information. Before the recent session, so we weren't there when he threw the chair, we're called to the lobby to find out he has thrown a chair at the secretary. So let's keep that in mind. So we're not going to contact the appropriate authorities because we weren't there. We can't provide details, and we're not going to provide all details because, again, in the particular situation, we can't provide all details about a client, regardless of what's going on. We would provide the least amount of information if we are going to provide the details. We would also suggest the front desk contact the appropriate authorities to break confidentiality because this is an issue of safety, and safety supersedes confidentiality. So those two are automatically ruled out. So we're either going to contact the appropriate authorities and provide the least amount of information about the situation, or suggest that the front desk contact the authorities to ensure this situation does not impact the therapeutic relationship. So the key emphasis, we were called to the lobby. So what would it look like if we were calling the authorities and saying, hey, I'm not really sure about the details, but this is what I know? We don't base our disclosures on hearsay. So we're going to rule out that we contact because we weren't there. And what happens if this guy who is not already trusting us because it's difficult for us to provide a rapport with this guy finds out that we made the disclosure about him when we weren't there and we're doing it based off of hearsay? So we're going to suggest the front desk call, and us suggesting doesn't mean that they're going to do it, but we at least have to start there, because if they don't do it, then we would have to make the call, but we have to provide that instance in that situation to happen prior for us doing it because we weren't there and we don't know all the details. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 10. A social worker at a community mental health agency has been working with a 30-year-old female for the past 4 months. Social worker and woman have been working on ways to improve her depression by getting more active in the community. The social worker sees the woman at the book club that she has been attending at the local library for years. The woman walks up to the social worker and says, I'm so happy I know someone here because I was so nervous to attend. What would be the best thing for the social worker to do to best treat the woman? A, continue to attend the book club since the woman is comfortable with the social worker being there. B, drop out of the book club and find another one in an area to avoid any issues. C, validate the woman's accomplishment and ask her to attend a different book club to avoid any issues arising. D, refer the woman to a different social worker to avoid any issues. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you're blessed to have in your life right now. Opening the polls. 30 more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is D. Third place is C. Fourth place is A. Let's look at it. Social worker, community mental health agency, working with a 30-year-old female for 4 months. Key emphasis, 4 months. Social worker and woman have been working on ways to improve depression by getting active in the community. So that's the goal for treatment. The social worker sees the woman at the book club, at the local library. She's attended it for years. The woman walks over to the social worker and says, I'm so happy that I know someone here because I was so nervous to attend. Quick review. Community mental health agency, 30-year-old female. This has been going on for 4 months. And she wanted to improve her depression by getting more active in the community. We've been attending the book club for years, and this woman was excited to see us. So we're going to rule out A, because just because the woman's comfortable with us being there doesn't mean that we're going to keep doing this, because this is a dual relationship and we don't like those. We're not two people, so we're not getting into a duel with the client because that would be a fight. So we're ruling that out. We're not going to drop out of the book club because we've been doing this for years. What would happen if someone told you to stop doing a behavior or doing something that you've been doing for years for the sole fact that someone is just showing up for the absolute first time? This is something you've been doing for years. So this is not something we're automatically just going to drop out of willy-nilly. Therefore, are we going to tell this woman who is experiencing depressive symptoms, get the heck out of here? Or are we going to refer her out? We've been seeing her for 4 months and she wanted to get more active in the community. Hasn't she done that already? She's at the book club. She's excited and she's here. So we're not going to tell somebody that was once depressed, get out of here, find another place to do it. Because her goal is to get more active in the community. We've been seeing her for 4 months. So why not ship her out to another therapist, because our goal for treatment is completed. And that way she can still attend the book club with us. And if something comes up, we're there to support her, but not outside of a professional realm. So that is how we look at that question in particular, because we're going to refer her out because she accomplished her goal, which is getting more active in the community. And we're not dropping out of the book club because we've been doing this for years. And we're not just going to tell her to get the heck out of here. And we're not going to let a dual relationship happen. So that is how we look at it. The answer would be D, refer the woman to a different social worker to avoid any issues from arising.